"You have 6 months to live," the doctor said, holding up the cancer diagnosis. "Maybe less if you push yourself." But when Sergeant Emma Phoenix Cross learned that her final deployment request was approved, she was about to prove that dying warriors fight harder than those who expect to survive. Meet Staff Sergeant Emma Cross, 34 years old, with hollow cheeks from chemotherapy and steady hands that refused to shake despite the cancer consuming her body. For 9 years, she had served as a precision marksman, but stage 3 pancreatic cancer had transformed her from a lead operator into dying soldier counting days instead of missions. Emma's diagnosis 6 months earlier had been the kind of news that destroys lives and ends careers. Pancreatic cancer with metastasis to liver and lymph nodes. Terminal prognosis: 6 to 12 months, maximum survival, even with aggressive treatment. The oncologist had been clinically precise, while delivering information that meant Emma's future measured in weeks rather than years. "I'm sorry," Dr. Richardson had said with professional sympathy that couldn't soften the brutal reality. "We can try chemotherapy to extend your time, but you need to understand this is palliative care, not curative treatment. The cancer is too advanced for surgical intervention." Emma had sat in the sterile medical office, processing information that transformed every plan and expectation into irrelevant fantasies. She was 34 years old, with no husband, no children, and no legacy except service that would be forgotten as soon as her replacement arrived. Her background made the diagnosis even more devastating because military service wasn't just her profession, it was her entire identity and the only family she had ever known. Emma had grown up in foster care, moving between homes that provided shelter but never belonging. The Army had been the first place where she felt valued for who she was rather than tolerated until she aged out of the system. Military service had given Emma purpose, community, and meaning that civilian life had never provided. Her fellow soldiers were the only family she had ever known, and combat deployments were when she felt most alive. The cancer diagnosis didn't just threaten her life, it destroyed the only identity that had ever made sense. Emma's initial response to terminal diagnosis had been typical of soldiers who define themselves through service. She had requested continuation of duty despite medical recommendations for immediate retirement and disability processing. Military regulations allowed terminally ill personnel to continue serving if they remained physically capable, and mission requirements didn't require full medical clearance. But the medical board had denied her deployment request with clinical precision that dismissed her desperate need to remain useful. Staff Sergeant Cross is physically compromised by cancer and chemotherapy side effects. Recommend immediate medical retirement and transition to civilian hospice care. Emma had appealed the decision through every available channel, arguing that dying soldiers deserved the dignity of choosing how to spend their final months. She didn't want to waste away in hospitals surrounded by pitying strangers. She wanted to die with a rifle in her hands, doing something that mattered. Colonel James Hammer Davidson had been the only officer willing to consider Emma's appeal, despite intense pressure from medical personnel who believed deployment would accelerate her death. At 49 years old, with 27 years of service, Davidson understood that some warriors needed to die on their feet rather than their backs. "Emma, I need you to understand what you're asking," Davidson had said during their private meeting. "Deployment stress will accelerate the cancer. You might have 6 months here with medical support, but you'll have maybe 3 months deployed. Possibly less." Emma had looked at Davidson with eyes that showed complete acceptance of her situation. "Sir, 6 months of dying slowly here, or 3 months of dying while doing something useful. That's not a difficult choice for me." Davidson had violated medical recommendations and approved Emma's deployment request with full knowledge that he was sending a terminally ill soldier into combat. His decision would either be validated as compassionate leadership or condemned as reckless disregard for personnel welfare. Emma's final deployment began 8 weeks after her diagnosis, when chemotherapy side effects had stabilized enough for limited physical function. She arrived at Forward Operating Base Justice, carrying medications that would extend her life by weeks and equipment that would let her spend those weeks purposefully. Her arrival created immediate controversy among personnel who believed dying soldiers had no place in combat operations. Medical staff questioned the ethics of allowing terminal patients to deploy. Combat operators worried about relying on someone whose physical deterioration was inevitable and accelerating. "She's dying," became the whispered assessment whenever Emma appeared at briefings or training exercises. Her physical decline was visible to everyone who saw her progressive weight loss, increasing fatigue, and medication schedule that documented her deteriorating condition. But Emma's shooting performance remained unchanged, despite her body's betrayal. Her hands stayed steady even when her legs weakened. Her eyes tracked targets accurately, even when pain medications created cognitive fog. The cancer was destroying her body, but somehow leaving her most critical capabilities intact. Lieutenant Marcus Stone Chen commanded the infantry company where Emma was assigned as designated marksman. At 29 years old, he was young enough to be uncomfortable with the ethics of deploying dying soldiers, but experienced enough to recognize that Emma's capabilities exceeded most healthy operators. "Cross, I need to ask you something directly," Chen had said during their first private conversation. "Can you still perform your mission despite your medical condition?" Emma had appreciated Chen's directness after weeks of pity and awkward avoidance from people who didn't know how to interact with dying colleagues. "Sir, I can shoot better than anyone in this company. The cancer is killing me slowly, but it hasn't affected my marksmanship or tactical judgment. I can do my job until I physically can't." Chen had accepted Emma's assessment and assigned her to overwatch positions where her shooting skills mattered more than physical endurance. The arrangement worked well for 3 weeks until intelligence reports indicated major enemy offensive that would test everyone's capabilities regardless of health status. The enemy attack was designed to overwhelm forward operating base justice through coordinated assault that exploited gaps in defensive coverage and numerical superiority. Intelligence estimated over 300 enemy fighters would attack simultaneously from multiple directions, creating situations where every defender's contribution would be critical. Emma's assigned position was Tower 7, an observation post that provided commanding view of the eastern approach, where enemy forces were expected to concentrate their assault. The tower's elevation offered excellent fields of fire, but required climbing 3 flights of stairs that Emma's weakened body could barely manage. "Cross, are you sure you can handle Tower 7? Chen had asked, with genuine concern rather than doubt about her capabilities. "That's a lot of stairs for someone in your condition." Emma had smiled, despite knowing that the climb would exhaust her before the fighting even began. "Sir, getting up those stairs is the hardest part. Once I'm in position, I'll be more effective than any healthy sniper you could assign." The enemy assault began at 0400 hours with mortar bombardment designed to destroy defensive positions and create chaos before ground forces attacked. Emma was already in Tower 7, having climbed the stairs 2 hours earlier, while her body still had energy for the effort. Through her scope, Emma could see enemy forces massing for assault in terrain that provided natural concealment from most defensive positions. Her elevated observation post was one of the few locations that could engage the primary enemy concentration before they reached coalition defensive lines. "Tower 7, this is combat operations," Chen's voice crackled through Emma's radio. "Enemy forces are beginning their approach on your sector. Engage at your discretion and thin them out before they reach primary defensive positions." Emma settled into her shooting position with movements that required conscious effort, because her body's energy reserves were nearly depleted from the stair climb. But once she was positioned, the cancer didn't matter anymore. She was a sniper with targets and time to work. Her first shot eliminated an enemy commander directing assault groups toward coalition positions. The suppressed rifle provided no indication of threat origin, creating confusion among enemy fighters who suddenly faced invisible opposition. Emma's 2nd through 10th shots systematically eliminated enemy squad leaders, whose deaths would disrupt coordination and create hesitation among fighters, who were beginning to realize their approach was more dangerous than intelligence had suggested. "Tower 7. Outstanding shooting." Chen transmitted with professional respect that acknowledged Emma's capabilities without referencing her terminal condition. "Continue engaging high-value targets." Emma's 11th through 20th kills targeted enemy heavy weapons, crews whose elimination would reduce suppressive fire capabilities and improve survival odds for coalition defensive positions that were beginning to take contact from enemy advance elements. The shooting required concentration that pushed aside pain from cancer that was actively destroying her internal organs. Emma's medications could only do so much to manage symptoms that were worsening by the hour, but she refused to let physical suffering compromise her effectiveness. Her 21st through 30th kills came during the most intense phase of enemy assault, when overwhelming numbers threatened to breach defensive positions through sheer volume of attackers. Emma's precision fire created casualties that slowed enemy momentum at critical moments. "Emma, how are you holding up?" Chen's personal concern broke through professional communications protocols. He could see through his binoculars that Emma's movements were becoming labored as physical deterioration accelerated under combat stress. "Still shooting, sir," Emma replied with voice that revealed pain she was managing through willpower rather than medication. Still have targets and ammunition. I'm good. Emma's 31st through 39th kills eliminated the final enemy leaders, who were trying to organize withdrawal after their assault collapsed under defensive fire that included precision shooting from someone they couldn't locate or counter. At 06:15, 2 hours after the engagement began, enemy forces were retreating with casualties that exceeded their worst projections. Forward operating base justice had held against assault that should have overwhelmed defensive capabilities, in significant part because one dying sniper had refused to let cancer compromise her effectiveness. Ceasefire, ceasefire, Chen transmitted to all positions. Enemy forces are withdrawing. Defensive positions are secure. Emma set down her rifle with hands that were shaking from exhaustion rather than fear. Her body was shutting down from stress that healthy operators could manage, but terminal patients couldn't sustain indefinitely. She had maybe hours of functional capability remaining before the cancer's acceleration became irreversible. When Chen reached Tower 7 30 minutes later, he found Emma barely conscious but still maintaining security watch over her assigned sector. The professionalism that had defined her career remained intact even as her body failed. Emma, medical is on the way, Chen said quietly, knowing that medical intervention could only manage comfort rather than reverse processes that were now inevitable. Emma smiled weakly. Sir, did we hold? We held. You killed 39 enemy fighters and broke their assault at critical moments. You saved this base. Emma closed her eyes with satisfaction that transcended physical suffering. Good. That's good. Medical evacuation transported Emma to field hospital, where doctors confirmed what everyone already knew. The combat stress had accelerated her cancer's progression beyond any treatment capability. She had days at most, possibly only hours. Colonel Davidson visited Emma's hospital bed 12 hours after the battle. She was barely conscious but aware enough to recognize the commander who had given her the final deployment that defined her legacy. Emma, you did it, Davidson said quietly. 39 confirmed kills. You held the eastern approach when it mattered most. Every soldier in that base is alive because you refused to let cancer stop you from doing your job. Emma managed a weak smile. Thank you, sir, for letting me die the way I wanted. On my feet, with a rifle, doing something that mattered. Davidson nodded with emotions that military bearing couldn't completely suppress. Emma, you're the bravest warrior I've ever commanded, not because you faced the enemy, but because you faced death on your own terms. Staff Sergeant Emma Cross died 43 hours after the battle, surrounded by the military family she had chosen and the legacy she had created during her final mission. Her 39 kills had saved the base, but her courage had inspired everyone who witnessed someone choose how to die with the same determination that had defined how she lived. The memorial service included honors typically reserved for longer careers and higher ranks, but Emma's final deployment had earned respect that transcended time served. Chen delivered eulogy that captured what Emma's last mission had meant to those who witnessed it. Emma knew she was dying, Chen told the assembled personnel, but she refused to waste her final days. She climbed stairs that healthy soldiers complained about. She shot with precision that specialists couldn't match, and she held her position until the mission was complete. Emma didn't just fight cancer, she refused to let it define her final chapter. Davidson approved creation of the Emma Cross Award for personnel who demonstrated extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. The award recognized that bravery wasn't just about facing external enemies. Sometimes the hardest battles were against betrayals from your own body. Emma's story became teaching case for medical ethics programs debating whether terminally ill personnel should be allowed to continue serving. Her success challenged assumptions about physical capability requirements and raised questions about whether institutions had the right to prevent dying individuals from choosing meaningful final contributions. Today, military policy allows terminal patients to remain in service if they maintain operational capability and understand the risks. Emma's advocacy for the right to die while serving influenced reforms that respected individual agency while maintaining operational standards. Her philosophy, validated through 39 confirmed kills achieved while cancer destroyed her body, has become guidance for personnel facing terminal diagnosis. Dying is inevitable. How you spend your final days is choice. Some people choose comfort. Warriors choose meaning. Have you ever faced a situation where everyone told you to quit, but you knew that continuing mattered more than any comfort they could offer? Emma's story reminds us that the bravest warriors are often the ones fighting battles that others can't see against enemies that medicine can't defeat. The doctors who said she was too sick to deploy learned that physical deterioration doesn't necessarily compromise capabilities that matter most. Sometimes dying warriors fight harder than those who expect to survive, because they understand that time is the only resource that truly runs out. If you believe that choosing how to spend your final days matters more than how many days you have, and that meaningful contribution exceeds comfortable decline, share this story. Because somewhere, someone is being told to give up on what matters because their body is failing. Not knowing that warriors don't measure life in time, they measure it in impact. Emma Cross didn't just kill 39 enemies on what doctors said was her last mission. She proved that dying warriors can choose legacy over longevity. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let death define your final chapter. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this.